Macy opened her eyes to all of the posters that lined her ceiling. The music in her headphones blared so loud she didn't hear her mother knocking at the bedroom door.
Macy, it's almost time to eat. Macy? Macy!
Macy caught sight of her mother, then quickly slipped off her headphones as she sat up on her bed.
I'm sorry, what?
It's almost time to eat. Go wash up. Your father will be home soon.
Fine, but you know I have to leave in like 20 minutes, right?
What? And where are you going?
I have rehearsals for tomorrow's gig, remember? I'm spinning at the park for the music festival.
Have you looked outside? We're about to have some bad weather. You're not going anywhere. As if on cue, Macy's cell phone chimed, alerting her that she had received a text. A deep frown covered her face as she read the digital message. Then she sarcastically snapped at her mother.
Well, I hope you're happy. Rehearsals are canceled due to the weather.
See? Now go wash up. Macy began to send a text reply as her mother headed back to the kitchen. Suddenly her phone flickered off. All the lights in the apartment followed suit, as the dim light from the setting sun was all that illuminated her room.
Mom, what happened to the lights? My phone is dead too.
Macy made her way into the kitchen where her mother was. She was still trying to prepare dinner when Macy heard an eerily loud explosion come from outside. She rushed to the patio balcony of their high-rise apartment building when a giant, dark mass passed by the closed blinds. She stopped in her tracks as fear crept into her mind. Then she slowly approached the door to the patio and opened it with caution, ignoring her mother who was yelling at her.
Macy, come away from there. What are you doing? Get away from the patio.
Macy cautiously stepped out onto the patio, scanning the city's skyline for any sign of the giant shadow that passed by the apartment. She looked over at the building her father worked in, which was easily seen from their home only blocks away, when she saw a massive, multi-limbed creature swoop down and land on top of the building, crushing the workers inside. Then her heart sank as she remembered her father showing her the office he worked out of and how it was on the second floor from the top. Tears began to well up in her eyes as her mother stepped out to join her.
Macy, what is it?
Diana followed Macy's gaze to the now crumbling building with the giant winged creature on it who seemed to be roaring at something. As the two followed its gaze, they began to feel small tremors, followed by low booming sounds. Mother and daughter's eyes widened when they saw the massive figure of an even larger beast wading down the street below. Diana noticed the entire city was out of power as she watched the two beasts clash in furious combat just a few blocks away.
Macy, we have to go.
Macy stood motionless as she stared at the building her father worked in, her heart feeling as if it was sinking into her stomach.
Macy, we have to go now.
Diana grabbed Macy's arm and pulled her inside as the pair made their way to the front door. She struggled to unlock the door, fear completely taking over. Finally, she unlocked it. She turned and grabbed Macy, who was still in shock.
Baby, come on. We have to get out of here. We have to find a shelter. Now come on, let's go. But what about Dad?
Then it hit her. She now understood why Macy was so upset. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she struggled to find the right words to say as she remembered seeing the building her husband worked in being destroyed by that massive flying creature. Was her husband dead? She felt pain rising in her chest, snapping her back to reality. She swallowed hard as she pulled Macy in for a reassuring embrace.
Listen, we don't know that he's dead. We need to get to a shelter, and once this passes, we'll find him, all right? All right, yeah.
Diana began to question her own words as they rushed to the room housing the emergency stairwell. She knew were he at work, the likelihood of his survival was minimal. But she couldn't let Macy see her doubt. She had to be strong now. She had a daughter to protect. The pair could hear the sounds of the battle taking place outside. The building would shift occasionally, causing the mother and daughter to lose their footing. Macy felt a sharp pain in her ankle as she gripped the stair rail for support.
Mom, I think I twisted my ankle. It's okay, baby, it's okay. Come on, we've got to keep moving.
Diana threw Macy's arm over her shoulder to help her as they made their way down the last flight of stairs. Soon the pair found themselves on the side of the street looking up at a massive, bulky creature with dorsal plates lining its back. Macy noticed its attention was focused on something else. As she looked down the street, she saw nothing but destroyed building, rubble, and the occasional body. Then she noticed the flying creature in the distance drawing ever closer. Fear and wonder kept her suspended in curiosity as she watched the behemoth in front of her begin to shift its weight as it turned its back on the coming creature. Mother and daughter's jaw dropped when they watched the giant's massive, thick tail slam the flying creature into the building across from them. Chunks of the building and debris began to fall to Macy and her mother. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Macy watched a small piece of building grow larger and larger as it fell towards her. Just as the massive piece of concrete was about to crush her, she felt herself lose balance as her mother pushed her out of its way. Macy looked back at her mother, whose eyes were wide with fear as the massive piece of building came crashing down on her. Time was still moving slow for Macy as she hit the ground with a hard thud, slamming her head into the curb below. Then everything went black. Macy looked at Nima's glowing avatar, who had promised not to leave her in the darkness.
Doctor, might I inquire why you shared this memory with me? I didn't mean to. Being here in all this darkness just reminded me of that memory. Wait, I can still remember it. I thought once you shared a memory with the Cephalon, you lose it forever. That is correct. However, your consciousness is still within the Cephalon. The extraction process requires the memory's owner to disconnect in order for completion to be obtained. I see. That's good to...
The darkness around her faded to white. Then almost instantaneously, color filled what was once a void. She found herself in a room filled with all manner of futuristic electronics. Her rational mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. This was obviously a memory, but whose memory? She had learned that there were some things she might not be able to discern from the memories, like precise locations or time frames, but there was plenty to learn. Her thoughts were interrupted by two voices behind her. She spun around to find the other half of an observation deck with a massive window overlooking a lush forest with mountain ranges in the distance. In the center of the massive viewport stood two human-like figures, speaking to one another in a language she did not understand.
Nima, can you translate? One moment, please.
The language translation protocols within Nima's code instantaneously kicked in as Macy drew ever closer to the two figures.
Initial scans show a 98% biological compatibility statistic. There is no closer planet with conditions like these for life to thrive. However, it falls to us if and how we should proceed with colonization.
There is thriving life already on this planet, yes?
Indeed. However, we can only assume at this point the nature of its ecosystem. If it is decided, then we shall begin collecting data and cataloging it for future references. However, I would like to say, in order to avoid another calamity, We should approach this world differently. We will need more than what remains to rebuild our civilization. I have found a suitable template for our needs. Interesting to note, it is very possible that they represent what our primitive ancestors once were.
Macy was now standing next to the two conversing men. They wore elaborate garments, trimmed and laced with gold. They were not human. They were much taller than any human Macy was aware of, at least 3 meters tall. Their features were elongated and muscular. She noticed that one of them had green skin and the other had blue skin. Their hair flowed as if they had recently been to a salon, and their faces were colored with what Macy assumed was some sort of makeup or face paint.
It is most unfortunate that so few of us have survived. The conditions on this planet will take some time to adjust to, and time flows differently on this world. Though we will not age at the same rate, our offspring will. Thus, we will need a system constructed around this planet's laws of nature. It seems we have no better option.
Macy noticed the two beings simultaneously take a deep breath as they turned to look at each other.
Inky, my brother, you who foretold the coming calamity to our world. You who warned all and was ignored. You will build our civilization back to what it once was, and we will not make the same mistakes we made in the past. It is not our destiny to fade into oblivion.
Macy watched as the two men embraced each other in a warm hug.
Enlil, my brother, the only one who stood by me when I made my claims. Ever wise and stoic, you shall decide the laws of our people and monitor its progression, delivering swift justice to those who threaten it and rewarding those who walk the righteous path. The Anunnaki will rise again.
Macy's head began to swell with questions. Who were these Anunnaki? Where was she? When was she? All of her questions left her thoughts as a bright illumination appeared in the distance above the tree line. The light grew larger and larger as it approached the viewport. Then she heard a sound she was familiar with as it echoed through the observation deck. It was the large moth-like creature she had witnessed battling Gigan. The bioluminescent light faded as the creature hovered in front of the large glass window.
Fascinating.
Inky walked forward as the glass split down the middle and slid to either side of the observation deck. He reached out his hand to the giant creature, attempting to make contact.
My brother, do be careful.
Inky, somewhat ignoring Enlil's warning, slowly crept ever closer to the giant moth with Macy in tow. Almost at the edge, the philologist realized she was not on the surface, but in a flying ship of some sort. Oddly enough, it was quiet compared to the beast flapping its wings in front of them. She could feel the air push against her skin with each wing beat.
I am Inky. What is your name?
The Anunnaki gently touched the top of the mandible of the giant insect.
Mosura. Beautiful.
After a moment, Mothra backed away from the ship, still maintaining its altitude. She let out a cry and dove downward, underneath the aircraft Macy was in. Moments later, she was flying back in the direction she came from. Enlil's voice caught Macy's attention.
Well, pray tell, brother, what did you learn?
Inky locked eyes with his brother as he slowly turned to face him with a look of awe.
We have been welcomed as refugees and invited to attend a very special event.
Macy's head swirled with questions as the memory faded into a clearing surrounded by a dense forest and topped with mountain ranges. She noticed Inky and Enlil standing with a host of other individuals dressed in ornate garments. It was dark as the scattered clouds loomed overhead, obscuring the star-filled sky above. Macy followed Nima's hand gesture to find the group heading into the forest. Following close behind, she could hear the two brothers speaking to each other as they made their way through the moonlit night.
I know you feel as though they are mindless beasts like the ones we have come to know, but they do deserve your respect. For if not for them, these mighty titans who have curated this world, we would not have a refuge. This is their world.
I cannot deny the truth you speak. But tell me, what of your son and yet unborn children? Are they to live subjugated lives underneath the whims of these beasts? Our people suffered that fate once before.
As Macy caught up with the brothers, she could see Inky holding a newborn quietly sleeping, nestled in his arms. She smiled as she glanced over at Enlil, who was also holding what looked like a newborn. To her shock upon closer inspection, she noticed the baby looked almost like a normal human baby. Inky began to speak.
You are not wrong, my brother. But it is up to us whether that happens again. We must learn to coexist. We must teach our kin to do the same. We must set the example for Adamu and his kin. How fitting that all are born on the same day. This is a time for celebration, General. Set aside these thoughts. Think about the future of Nima and your children. The wonderful opportunity to raise a civilization greater than the one that was destroyed of its own ignorance.
Macy stopped dead in her tracks. She glanced over at Nima, who was by her side. Her expressionless look made the young doctor feel a bit uneasy. Enlil's voice snapped her out of her shock as she caught up with the two brothers. However, this time, she looked back at the others following behind. There, walking slightly behind and to the right of Enlil, was Nima, in the flesh. Macy began to contemplate the situation.
I wait for the day I can see her face glow as Hera's did when little Marduk here came into the world. The first of the great Inky's bloodline. You are right, brother. This is a time for celebration.
Macy felt the ground quake under her feet. She and the others halted their advance to get their footing. Macy heard sounds of creatures and beasts moving all around her. She had been too caught up in the conversation to notice all the animals that surrounded them, all heading in the same direction. A cacophony of animal calls rang out in sporadic intervals. Large and small shadows broke through the forest canopy as massive creatures flew overhead.
Come everyone, it is only the natives. All have been invited.
Soon the group found themselves at the tree line. In front of them was a massive clearing with a small mountainous structure in the center, surrounded by all manner of Earth's creatures, big and small. She could even swear she saw a dinosaur or two amongst the crowd. But what caught her attention were the massive beasts towering over the smaller creatures. The Titans. There were so many, Macy was beside herself. She knew there had to have been more than what Monarch was aware of. She began committing to memory the descriptions of all of them. There was the one who walked among the elephants and mammoths, sporting an extremely large pair of tusks and a surprisingly small snout. Not far from that Titan, a large multi-limbed giant stood with tentacles that dangled from its maw. A pair of large wolf-like titans reminded her of the mighty beasts of Ragnarok told in Old Norse legends. And behind them stood a beast that resembled a mountain. Its mighty roar took Macy's breath away. Cries from above pulled at her already stretched attention span as she looked up to find a flock of giant pterosaur-like creatures circling. Two among them, as large as commercial airliners, swooped down and landed in front of her, kicking up a small dust cloud. After it cleared, Macy pushed forward with the group. She looked up at the giant winged beast as she moved past its massive wings. She took note of the burning edges of its wings membrane, as it appears that they were self-perpetuated. It reminded her of the legendary phoenix passed down from civilization to civilization. A familiar sound pulled her attention away from the massive bird-like titan. As she turned to face the group, she was met by a pair of yellow-reddish eyes. She could feel his breath push across her skin as she stared in fear at the beast's all-too-familiar face. She had never been this close to Godzilla before. He was so close, all Macy had to do was reach out and touch him. But fear kept her paralyzed. Suddenly, another familiar cry snapped her out of her paralysis. It was Mothra, but Macy dare not move. Her excitement caused her to completely forget that she was in a simulation. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she watched Inky walk up beside her and extend one of his hands outward, gently placing it on Godzilla's snout. He closed his eyes and but a moment later began to speak.
This one is Dagon, son of Kronos and Rhea.
Inky opened his eyes as the giant beast pulled away and headed in the opposite direction, revealing two more slightly larger versions of himself standing around a large nest made of stone and tree. Macy noticed the largest of the three had a fresh wound running across its snout. Dagon walked up to, whom Macy assumed was Rhea, and nestled his snout into his mother's side. Macy's heart warmed as she watched the family of Godzilla's ancestors turn their attention to the sky, as a brilliant light began to pour through the broken clouds. From Macy's point of view on the ground, the light aligned itself with the moon behind it as it drew ever closer. Now she could see the benevolent wings of Mothra as her bioluminescent light faded. Mothra landed between her and the nest with such grace barely anything on the ground was disturbed. With its wings folded up, it turned and faced the Anunnaki. She moved in close to the group, dipping her head down close to Inky and Enlil. Her gaze shifted between the two as Macy realized Mothra wasn't inspecting the brothers, but the newborns they held in their arms. The majestic creature pulled its head back and flapped its wings while letting out what seemed like a joyful cry. She turned back to face the nest. Macy noticed how all the creatures around her watched with intensity as Mothra unfurled her wings over the nest, releasing a blue powdery substance which blanketed the egg within. Macy watched as the egg began to move, rocking from side to side as small cracks in its shell began to form. All was silent now. Not a single titan or creature stirred as the egg began to hatch. It was as if even the wind was holding its breath. Suddenly, a chip of shell fell away, revealing a tiny claw swiping at the air. It pulled itself back into the egg. Then moments later, the entire shell burst open like a water balloon, revealing a human-sized baby Godzilla whose thrashing began to calm as it opened its eyes and took its first breath. Then, with as much strength as it could muster, the newborn let out its first cry. Rhea bent down and nuzzled her baby, who was affectionately returning the gesture, squawking and struggling to stand on its own 2 feet. Kronos and Dagon followed suit as Mothra let out a cry startling the infant. The baby turned to face Mothra as she leaned in, bowing her head. The infant looked back at its parents with a questioned look on its face. Macy watched as its parents gestured with their snouts back towards Mothra, who was still bowing her head over the nest. The newborn turned back and slowly walked up to the Queen of the Monsters, nuzzling its snout in her fur-covered forehead. After a moment, the giant moth pulled away and turned to face the beasts that had gathered from all around as she took to the sky and let out a triumphant cry. Macy had to cover her ears as all of the other creatures began to cry out as well. As she turned away and held her hands to her ears, she noticed that the two newborns the Anunnaki were holding began crying, obviously startled by the cacophony. Moments later, the cries died down and Macy regained her bearings. Inky's voice grabbed her attention.
This is Gojira, future ruler of this planet. Pray welcome to our future king.